Welcome to the Intercept Live. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. In this conversation that we began on last week, we are going to discuss all of the pressing issues of the day, everything from politics to news to breaking news to culture. And today I'm excited to be joined by one of the co-founders of the Intercept, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn is streaming from Brazil. Thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited that you have once again taken over the Intercept's Facebook page. It sounds so aggressive and invasive, and yet so productive at the same time.
Absolutely. And again, listen, thanks so much for helping bring this together. I mean, this is actually your brainchild. We've been talking about it for a while. So the entire reason that I'm doing this with the Intercept, this takeover, is because of our conversation. So thanks to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled that you're able to do this.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of news that we could talk about, and we're going to get to probably two of the three things that I wanted to discuss with you and Coulter at Berkeley and President Obama's $400,000 speech. Let's just jump in right there. There's a lot of conversations. I honestly thought this would be over by now. I'm somewhat, and I mentioned to you, I'm agnostic about it. I see a lot of negatives about it. In some ways, it's just the system that bothers me more than the individual. I wanted to get your take. What is your take on President Obama giving a speech for Wall Street for $400,000?
So I think the interesting thing to ask is, why has it resonated so much? Why has this story endured for 3 or 4 days now with such intense emotions on all sides? And I don't think it has anything to do with anyone believing that President Obama himself has done something legally wrong or necessarily ethically or morally wrong. For better or worse, we live in an unrestrained system of capitalism. Wall Street is one of the most dominant factions in the United States. It has the ability legally to offer huge amounts of money to influential political figures, and President Obama has the legal right to accept that money. So that's not really the issue. I think the issue is the broader political points that it makes about our political culture and the Democratic Party. Obviously, it resonates because the issue of huge fees from Wall Street was a major issue as part of the Democratic primary because of Hillary Clinton and then into the general election. So I think it reinforces the notion that Democratic Party leaders are extremely close to and popular with Wall Street tycoons. I think it raises implications about the kind of democracy we live in, where our political leaders are able instantaneously to convert their political influence and political celebrity into massive personal enrichment. They're basically guaranteed of being multimillionaires worth hundreds of millions of dollars upon leaving office. Tony Blair did it, Ronald Reagan did it, Bill Clinton did it, Hillary Clinton did it, and now Obama is doing it. And so it's obviously a significant question in terms of what it means for our democracy when political leaders know they can be enriched by these factions. And then I think it has a lot to do as well with how the Democratic Party is perceived. The Democratic Party is wiped out on all political levels. A poll just showed that they are perceived as being more out of touch with ordinary citizens than either the Republican Party or Donald Trump, both of whom are perceived as out of touch, but not as out of touch with Democrats. Obviously, when you have the symbols of the Democratic Party, cavorting constantly with Wall Street, after spending years protecting Wall Street from prosecution and from populist outrage, making huge amounts of money for 40 minutes of work, more money than a lot of people make over a decade of work or longer, that raises real questions about what kind of party this is, to whom they're loyal, and whether or not they're going to be able to overcome the political collapse that has brought Donald Trump and huge numbers of right-wing Republicans into political office.
So to me, this is like the culmination of, and we'll be speaking with Thomas Frank later on in this episode. This is like the culmination for me of what the Democratic Party has been doing for the last 30 some odd years. They've been consistently moving to the right on economic policies. It was all the rave to back in the 90s and the early 2000s to say I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and this seems to be the world that the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, wanted to frame. And so to me, this isn't really a surprise so much as it is almost the final form, if you would, of the Democratic Party. Is it that we didn't notice this happening underneath us that surprises everyone. And now with this speech, we are looking at it and saying, oh, something isn't right with the Democrats. The Democrats aren't really the party of the people. They're not populist, because this has consistently been moving in this direction for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly, I think it's the brazenness of it, right? Like, he's not even out of office 2 months or 3 months, and he's just running straight to Wall Street. Like, not even a pretense of separation, right? It's just this, like, almost this, like, indifference, like this defiance to what anyone thinks. On top of which, you know, he just got a $65 million publishing contract for the book that he and his wife both separately are going to write. So he's drowning in huge amounts of money already. So it's just kind of this, I think, attitude of, while you're all suffering, and while I presided over millions of foreclosures and protected Wall Street, I'm now going to go and enrich myself beyond anything that I remotely need, right in front of your faces, as flagrantly as possible. And then I think part of it is just that it's Obama who's doing it, as opposed to Hillary Clinton. I think people expect this from the Clintons. I mean, I expect it from all of them, but I think a lot of people expect it from the Clintons, but not from Obama, in part because if you look at the kind of thing that Obama said when he decided he was going to run for president, the critique that he made of the Clintons in 2007 and 2008, the condemnations that he issued about the political system was very much along the lines of, our politicians spend too much time with the rich people of this country, who exert way too much influence. When you hang out with them, when you become a part of them, you lose sight of the struggles of ordinary people. That's what happened to our leaders. And since he's left office, you know, he spent all of his time with billionaires on private islands in the Caribbean, signing $100 million, tens of millions of dollars of book deals, and now headed to Wall Street. I just think it's so contrary to everything he claimed he wanted to do as a public figure that for a lot of people, at least, it's shocking not to see a politician do it, but to see him doing it and doing it so brazenly. So
Glenn, now, granted, I'm doing this show because you put this together. I mean, for me, we worked on this, and I'm here. So, but you know, I disagree with you a little bit here. And I know you're very, very good at that. So here's what I see. Is it the individual or is it the system? Because for me, Obama doing this is I'm completely indifferent to Obama doing this because I saw Obama for who he was in 2008. At November 24th, 2008 to be precise, when Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner were added to his cabinet. That's when I realized. So to see him do this, it's almost like I'm completely agnostic about it, but I do feel the same intense critique of the system that allows it that you're mentioning. So, but I want to feel from you, like, is it Obama? Is it the system, or you feel like we should really focus in on both?
You know, like I was saying, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. I look at Obama as a fairly standard issue Democratic Party leader or a fairly standard American politician. I don't see him in this exceptional light. I don't view him as standing outside of the system or in opposition to it for the reasons that you just said. I mean, not just Timothy Geithner and the way he reacted to the 2008 crisis by serving and prioritizing the interests of Wall Street over ordinary Americans, but as a person who was focused on civil liberties and foreign policy, to watch him early in 2009 defend most of the policies of Bush Cheney that people expected he would uproot, and to strengthen them and extend them. I've been well aware of what Barack Obama is for a long time. So for me, it makes no difference that he's doing it. It's not a surprise. I was just saying part of why I think it has resonated is because there still are a lot of people who view Obama as this kind of singular figure who is different than and in opposition to the kind of sleazy and legally corrupt components of our political culture. And they're seeing him now feeding at that trough the way that, you know, most other ordinary politicians do. And I think that for those people who see him that way, not me and not you, it's a little bit shocking. And that's why I think the story has resonated that way.
And I agree. I actually think that actually works well for those of us who have been trying to shine light on the fact that this system operates within a certain framework, regardless of who's in the White House, right? We're seeing this right now with the culmination of Donald Trump's first 100 days. He has flipped on so many policies. It's almost breathtaking to see how he's conforming to what we kind of call the deep state in many regards. But to double back, though, I heard you mention a couple of things that I've heard online in the Twitter space and the blogosphere. And actually, there's an article by Matt Iglesias over at Vox that actually points out some of the same criticism that you have, surprisingly so, considering during the primaries, Matt Iglesias and Vox as a whole kind of protected Hillary Clinton from this exact criticism about taking this money from Wall Street. It's like they've seen the light all of a sudden. And a lot of people are seeing the light. I'm not going to, throw off on anyone who's coming to terms with the reality that President Obama is a part of this system. But it seems to me that, like, when people bring up the vacations that he takes, the fact that he hangs out with billionaires, and I've heard that a bunch of times in at least 20 different places since he was hanging out with Richard Branson, and I hear things about his book deal. I mean, my question would be on the flip side, like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Is he, he's not going to come and hang out with me. You're invited, President Obama, if you want, but he's not going to come hang out with me. I mean, some of those critiques to me seem to go beyond critiquing the system and really go into critiquing the individual, which from my worldview, critiquing the individual never really shines a light on what we need to do to attack the system.
Right. See, so I don't see those as a critique of the individual. I don't really care at all who Barack Obama's friends are, especially once he leaves office. Maybe Richard Branson is a really engaging intellect and a really charming personality, and the Obamas just love his company and aren't hanging out with him because they like his private island and his massive yachts, but because they just really enjoy, the conversations that emerge when you sit with Richard Branson.
Right.
So that for me is not relevant, but what is relevant is that what we see, if you look at the model of how Washington was supposed to work is envisioned not just by the founders, but over the next couple of centuries in terms of what politicians were supposed to be. It was supposed to be these kind of citizen politicians who get plucked out of average life, do public service, and then return to average life, so that these are representatives of the people who are electing them. And what we have instead is the emergence of this very isolated, privileged, oligarchical political class, which really interacts with and serves the interest of the richest and most powerful. So when you see Obama immediately rushing out of the White House to a private island of Richard Branson or to New York and being at Cantor Fitzgerald as they pay him $400,000, it's not a critique of Barack Obama personally or his personal choices, which I don't think is really any of our business. I think instead it's just a very potent symbol of the people to whom our political class bears allegiance. And when you look at things like Brexit in the UK or the rise of right-wing nationalist groups in Europe or the election of Donald Trump, the root cause of it is a perception that the political establishment and the prevailing political order are completely indifferent to the needs and interests of the ordinary person, that instead they are only self-interested and serving the richest donors at the expense of everybody else. And so these kinds of symbols of Barack Obama, who rode in on a wave of populist anger at Washington, suddenly showing himself totally integrated socially and culturally and financially and personally into this very system that people hate, I think it just kind of is a strong political symbol about our culture and not anything specifically personally about him.
We have a couple of comments from Facebook, and we actually have a voicemail about this very issue. So let's take a look at these comments and give them some feedback. The first one is from Mary. She says on Facebook, the Democrats seem to have dropped their claim that Russia hacked the presidential election. Why? That's a little bit of a segue from where we are right now. You can address that if you want, but I actually want to go to any comments that we have on this particular topic, Max. And if we don't have any, I know we have a voicemail that called in. You want to take that now, or that probably would take us a little too far off track? It's on you.
Yeah, I'll defer to you as the person who has taken over the Facebook page. I don't want you taking over mine, so I'll let you.
Not a problem. All right, so let's get any questions or comments that are dealing with President Obama and the speech. Let's take a look at this next one. This is from Mahmoud. Glenn Greenwald, do you support measures to remove money from politics, i.e. turn over Citizens United? And if I can elaborate on that a little bit, Glenn, do you see this as a direct connection with the same fight as Citizens United?
So at the time the Citizens United decision came out, which was 7 years ago in 2010, I wrote an article essentially saying that my legal and my constitutional view is the same as the one that was expressed by the ACLU, with whom I'm generally in accord on First Amendment free speech issues, the same as labor unions such as the ACLU, which supported the Citizens United decision, as well as left-wing anti-Wall Street activists like Elliot Spitzer, which is that the way to take money out of politics, which I view as one of the 2 or 3 greatest domestic problems, the dominance of corporate money in politics, the way to do that is not by empowering the government to restrict political speech, by telling a group of citizens like Citizens United, you're not allowed to spend money on a film about Hillary Clinton shortly before an election. The much better way to do it, both because that's unconstitutional and because it's dangerous to allow the government to do that, is through public financing of money. This is so much of a better way to take money out of politics. So if one candidate raises $10 million from corporate PACs, you have a program that publicly funds that candidate to ensure an equal playing field, so that if you want to have a well-financed campaign, you don't need to, as you now need to, go to corporations and serve their interests. You look for alternatives. For example, Bernie Sanders found an alternative way to finance his campaign. He was extremely competitive without turning to corporate money. So if you provide an alternative to corporate money to make sure that candidates can be competitive with the people who are being funded by corporations, that will take money out of politics without empowering the government to restrict political speech. And that, I think, is the vastly preferable way to do it. The problem is that there's huge opposition to public financing, because the people who can implement public financing are the very people who are put into office by corporations that don't want the playing field.
Exactly.
Evened. Right. And so that's been the problem.
Absolutely.
And let me just say one other thing about Citizens United, which is, way before 2010, the influence of corporate money in politics and the ability of politicians to get grotesquely enriched was almost unlimited. I mean, Bill Clinton made hundreds of millions of dollars giving speeches, so did Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. Corporations were dominant in our political process long before Citizens United, which was sort of a narrow issue. It did intensify the culture of money in politics, but I think it's a huge mistake to think about the world as pre-Citizens United and post-Citizens United, because post-Citizens United just accelerated what had already been this kind of oligarchical form of government. It didn't start it or initiate it or create it.
So I've actually seen this tied to the Barack Obama speech issue quite a few times, and I wanted to see, do you see this as as an extension of that, more of, I guess, the culture? And I think you spoke to that already, right? So this is almost indicative of the culture of corporate money in politics that goes above and beyond the Citizens United decision. Did I hear you correct?
Yeah, I mean, you referred earlier to your eye-opening of Barack Obama being 2008, when, in the wake of this Wall Street-caused financial crisis, he hired Tim Geithner, who then in turn hired a huge number of other Wall Street loyal servants to implement policies designed to protect Wall Street. That was 2008, 2009, before Citizens United. So, I think that it's a little bit, Citizens United has become this symbol. But I think that's all it is. It's just a symbol of what has been a very entrenched and well-developed trend for decades to ensure that our politics are dominated by corporate money.
I want to pull up a quote from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on this Barack Obama speech issue. And I found it interesting to see the difference in the language and some of the concern that's being floated by traditional Democrats. Here's the first quote on the screen here. It's from Elizabeth Warren. She said, "I was troubled by that in regards to the speech. I described it as a snake that slithers through Washington, and that it shows up in so many different ways here in Washington." As compared to Bernie Sanders, who said, he said, "I think it's unfortunate that President Obama is doing this. Wall Street has incredible power, and I would have hoped that the president would have not given a speech like this." So you have the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and you have the Elizabeth Warren, who is somewhere in the middle between Sanders and Clinton. But it seems like Elizabeth Warren had harsher words for President Obama, both of them clearly disagreeing with his decision to do this. What is your take on the division in the Democratic Party, or the left side of American politics, and how they're responding to this speech by President Obama?
I mean, I have to say, I found Elizabeth Warren's comments to be far more commendable than Sanders, and I have a lot of problems with Elizabeth Warren in the areas on which I focus: foreign policy, civil liberties. She's not very good. She's a very standard Democrat, often hawkish, doesn't have much of anything interesting to say about any of those issues. So I'm not a huge fan of Elizabeth Warren, but in this case, I have to say, you know, in the areas on which she focuses, she often is outstanding, and this was a great case because not only were her comments more kind of unflinching, and not only were they more systematic, like just more well thought through than Sanders, she also went first. She was the first one to denounce what Obama did, which makes it much harder. And what makes it most commendable of all is that she actually faces a pretty tough re-election fight in 2018. Yeah. Her seat is really not guaranteed. Her poll numbers are not great at all. Massachusetts, despite its reputation, can be a difficult state for Democrats. And it's very politically risky for a Democrat to explicitly condemn President Obama that way. Because for all his flaws, he's still wildly popular among the Democratic base, among the members of the Democratic Party. So I found what she did to be principled because there was no political benefit to her, but it's very consistent with her entire critique of the political process, which is that the political system as a whole, not the Republican Party, but the political system as a whole, both political parties have constituted themselves to be reliant on the same source of funding, which is corporate funding. And that as a result, they enact legislation designed to advance the interests of these small but very powerful factions that control Washington at the expense of everybody else. And that, as she said in these remarks, this is actually a threat to democracy. Because it is. Because if you have the federal government being controlled by the same set of private interests, regardless of the outcome of elections, you can vote for Republicans, you can vote for Democrats, the same lobbyists reign supreme, democracy is pretty illusory, and what you have instead is a plutocracy or an oligarchy. And that's what she was saying, that she was troubled by what Obama did, not because she's condemning Obama personally or cares how he makes his money, but because it's reflective of this pathology that is really systemic in Washington, that is not an ancillary issue. It's not like adjustable tax rates or modifying healthcare policy. It's existential to what democracy is, which is whether ordinary citizens actually can influence the policies and behavior of their government. And she's saying they can't, and the reason you can't is because the money that flows from these interests that's now flowing to President Obama is omnipotent. It cannot be defeated. And so I found her comments to be enlightening and also politically brave, because she's not only critiquing President Obama, she's critiquing the entire Democratic Party with those remarks as well. And that's the debate that the Democrats desperately need to have, but that they are trying to concoct every reason to avoid: Russia and Comey and all of these other things, because that is the question. How is the Democratic Party going to emerge from the collapse that it has suffered across the board without resolving the question of whether it's going to be the party of Wall Street and Silicon Valley and the plutocrats, or, on the other hand, the party of ordinary Americans and workers and the people who are suffering? And until it has that debate, I don't see any hope for the Democratic Party to improve, except by sheer luck, that Trump implodes, that the normal cycle of politics means that he loses in the midterm, but they're not going to do anything to help themselves. And it seems like self-critique is the thing that they want most to avoid.
Help me understand the difference, if you have a few more moments here, the difference between your position on Citizens United, matters of free speech, and the problem that existed before Citizens United, and the concern with the system that's operating as it does. This is what I think you and I definitely agree, that this is really just what America, neoliberalism, and Wall Street, they've collaborated together for years, and this is what they do. But in one hand, you seem to be more leaning towards more of a civil liberties position with regard to Citizens United. But then on the flip side, with President Obama and this particular issue, this is still corporate money being used as they see fit. It creates a problem very similar to the problem of Citizens United, at least in progressive arguments. What would you see the difference between your position on Citizens United versus Obama getting this Wall Street money in this way?
Right. So I mean, for better or for worse, and I think it's for better, we have a constitution that guarantees the right of free speech. And I think it's extremely important not to start thinking about ways to erode or limit that right, because that is the bedrock right for all political activism. And so I don't think that there are legal or constitutional issues raised by President Obama accepting $400,000 or even $4 million checks from Wall Street in order to give speeches. I don't think it's a legal or a constitutional issue. You probably couldn't restrict that without violating the constitutional rights of individuals once they leave office, the right to make money and to engage in private contracts. So then the question is, how do you create policies that ameliorate the effects of corporate money while at the same time protecting free speech? Well, you can tax the hell out of those kind of transactions so that income inequality is lessened.
Yeah.
You can punish politicians or political parties that do it. You can provide public financing so that corporate money loses its unique potency. That's what I think is where the solutions reside, not in eroding core political freedoms and empowering the government to restrict political speech, but in creating programs that lessen the harms or create alternatives and solutions to them.
Do you have a few more minutes? Because this conversation has gone for 3 days. Like you said, it's resonated in a way that I didn't expect. I expected to wake up the next day and it would be pretty much over. But some of the things that have jumped out, and I really wanted your input on it, is not only Obama in terms of his right to do this, and not only the effect that it has on the Democratic Party, but more specifically the appearance, right? A lot of people, that's the premise of Matt Iglesias' article, that it's the appearance of it that's problematic. In his case, he doesn't want to address the underlying neoliberal problems. At least that's not what I took from his article. In your case, you're saying, absolutely, let's address the underlying issues. But if it's a matter of appearance, I mean, who are we trying to make this look good for? I mean, there's going to be people who aren't going to like Obama whether he makes $10 or if he makes $100,000. You know, if it's a matter of making sure that people who have a problem with the Democratic Party right now don't see how they, get together with Wall Street, it's really like, who are we trying to please with appearances in this regard?
Well, I mean, political parties have to be concerned with persuading people that they deserve their support. Otherwise, those political parties won't win. I mean, appearances are everything in politics. So yes, there's a segment of the population that will hate Obama and that will hate Democrats no matter what they do. Conversely, there's a segment of the population that will love Obama and revere Obama and defend whatever it is he does. These are the two extremes of politics. As Donald Trump says, I could shoot people on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose my supporters. The same is true of President Obama. And so you leave those two fringes or those two extremes to the side, and there's a huge group of people in the middle that sometimes will vote for Democrats and sometimes will vote for Republicans, dependent upon who they think will more improve their lives. That's why George Bush won in 2004, Barack Obama won in 2008 and 2012, and then Donald Trump won in 2016, because there are people who switch political allegiances, or they stay home or go to the polls based on how inspired they are by that particular political party. So when you have a party that is perceived to be the party of Wall Street, the party whose political leaders convert their political celebrity and political influence not for the greater good, but to enrich themselves through what to most people look to be really sleazy and I mean, imagine what it's like to be, like a single mother working 2 jobs who literally can't pay for health care for your children, to watch a politician who vowed to destroy income inequality and make your life better go to a Wall Street bank not 3 months out of office and get a check for $400,000 to speak for an hour. What do you think that says about the purpose of political leaders, the purpose of the Democratic Party, at a time when the Democratic Party is already viewed as wildly out of touch? So yes, there are some people who are impervious to facts, either because they will hate Obama or defend Obama no matter what he does, but there's a huge number of people whose behavior is influenced, and of course the Democrats have to be concerned about motivating and inspiring those people to vote for them, because that's why the Democrats have lost and the Republicans have won, because they haven't cared enough about those people and what they think.
Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, co-founder of The Intercept. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you for your time today.
Have a great rest of the takeover, Benjamin. Thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right.
857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in on the discussion. We actually have a voicemail in regard to the same topic. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, Ben. My name is Ross Potter. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I was watching your segment on the Obama quote-unquote sellout. First, I think it's important to note that Matty Iglesias was once a very staunch, you could say, neoliberal defender. He's now, in my opinion, having seen his more recent tweets, maybe starting to see the light. Who knows? Anyway, his outrage is that he has always believed Obama to be the populist, person that he campaigned as, whereas most people who saw, right through that know that he's clearly not a sellout, that he's always been a corporatist. However, I think more the left outrage is this is now more evidence that Barack Obama has and has always been a corporatist, and it's liberal, mostly liberal elite that still fawn over him like he's some, untouchable democratic symbol. So I think that's where some of the outrage on the left is like, what more evidence do you need that he is this? And of course, the liberal outrage is like, why can't he do this? Every other president has done it. Yeah. And, the left goes back to, well, it's money in politics, and this is just furthering that, that optical sense that people have about it. Anyway, that's my comment. Keep up the great work. Thanks.
Thanks. So, that's an interesting take, right? So if we give people who are upset with President Obama, former President Obama now, who defended Hillary Clinton previously on her speeches, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, which I'm not inclined to do, but I'll do it. Let's do that. Then, I guess if you genuinely believe that President Obama was not a part of this system, or more precisely that he was a populist who was going to address economic inequality, the person that Glenn actually outlined pretty great. If you believe that, then I can see how this would be upsetting to you. And perhaps that's where Matt Iglesias, in the Vox article, that's where he was coming from, and maybe he's seen the light. I personally, listen, again, like I told Glenn, like I've said in this argument, which I still think should be going away sooner rather than later. If you paid attention to who President Obama was, President Obama, above anything else, I think is an institutionalist. He believes in these institutions. He believes in the government. He believes in the ability of the government to do things. He believes in neoliberal politics. I mean, this is who he is, for better or for worse. And so in that regard, I don't see it as a sellout as much as I see him as reaping the benefits of the system that he was an effective caretaker of for 8 years. I mean, people say he was a bad president. Well, it depends on what you wanted him to do. President Obama, he carried out his role as a caretaker in a very efficient way. I'm not surprised by the speech. I'm not really, to be honest with you, I'm not really, bothered by the speech, with the exception of the fact that it is a continuation of the same systemic problems that we've been crying about and yelling about and protesting about for a very long time. It's the system level that absolutely drives me batty, to be quite honest with you. All right, we're going to make a hard shift here. There's a lot of other politics that we have to cover, a lot of other news that we have to cover. Tomorrow begins, or completes rather, the culmination of Donald Trump's 100 days in the White House. He has put out a press release from the White House on the White House website that indicates that it has been a historic 100 days. Here to discuss it with me is L. Joy Williams, political strategist. L. Joy, thanks so much for joining me. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a beautiful day, and so I'm glad to be with you for the very first time.
Yes, this is our first time speaking. Thanks so much for coming at the last second. I really wanted someone to chime in. I didn't want to just give my opinion of what Donald Trump has been doing over the last couple of weeks, so to speak. Let's start off with an easy question here. What grade would you give President Trump on his first 100 days in the White House?
Well, there's no secret in terms of my own personal politics, and I don't see no reason to deviate from that. So I give him an F. And it's not only from my personal politics in terms of what he's accomplished, or he thinks he's accomplished, but what he was supposed to accomplish for his base of supporters. I don't think, one, hanging sort of getting a Supreme Court nomination as a victory, I don't think you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to, if you have control of the of Congress and you have the White House, you're supposed to be able to get your people confirmed, whether they be for cabinet positions or for the Supreme Court. So I don't, that could be one achievement that people want to hang a hat on, but I don't see that as one.
Well,
the other reason,
go ahead. Oh, no.
The other reason I give him an F is for overall leadership. And this is not only leadership amongst your base of supporters, but also supposedly being the leader of the United States.
Right.
He has created a climate of fear. He's created a climate of, being disorganized at the White House, that the position at the top of this country is disorganized, can't communicate a message very clearly, is a problem. And so that's why I give it an F. I also give him an F for not working well with others. The reason why we have this 100 days marker, and I admit, like everyone else, it's an arbitrary marker, but so much of our politics is arbitrary anyway. And so if you are going to hang your hat on the 100 days, which he did during the campaign, and say all of these things that he was going to get accomplished, in comparison with other men who have held the same position and have accomplished much more, they've accomplished that working with Congress and working with others. So if you go back to the original marker in FDR, right, it wasn't a whole bunch of, signing a whole bunch of executive orders that the reason why this marker existed. It existed in the commander-in-chief also working with the legislative body to get some real concrete work done. Right. And so far, he's been unable to do that, so he also gets an F.
All right.
So, all over. So I don't know what else.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so,
great,
at the top, you admitted your bias. I have the same bias, right? I mean, the worst decision we could have made as a country was to put Donald Trump in the White House. I was trying to find a way that I could.
And just to interrupt you just 1 second, that's not only for those of us who oppose him who are not Republicans, because you can be, Democrat, socialist, green, whatever. It's not only that, but also for Republicans, because he still created that climate that that allows them not to get anything done either.
Yeah, some of the best critiques that I hear of Donald Trump actually come from conservative commentators. So you're right. It's not just our perspective, vantage point as being progressives, liberals, or Democrats, however you want to identify. It's clearly based on what he's accomplished or the lack thereof. But what I found amazing was his press release that he put out from on the WhiteHouse.com, and he found a way to spin this pretty decently. It actually sounds good when you listen to it. He says Trump's 100 days, he has signed more bills, 28 bills, which is more than any president since Truman, so about 70 years worth. But once you drill down underneath that veneer, you see that these are assignments of names to post offices. It's kind of a collection of I don't want to call it useless legislation, but then there's also legislation in there that's been very detrimental, right? The rollback on our privacy rights for internet access and internet service providers. So he has this position, and people are actually taking this that he's accomplished a lot. I want to ask you about something that you mentioned in terms of getting things done. He has this legislation that he's accomplished, but his key legislation that he wanted to move, he's batting 0 for 10, if I'm not mistaken. That's number one. But the number two, all of the other things that he's gotten done has been in the form of executive order. I mean, the number one thing people complained about Republicans, about President Obama, was that he was ruling as a dictator, as a ruler, ruling by edict, I think is the exact phrase. What are your thoughts on these 28 pieces of legislation that he got signed, and the fact that most of what he's gotten done has been in the form of executive orders?
Yeah, so as someone who has worked in government before, I never call any legislation useless because
Oh,
there are
good point.
there are hundreds
Good
of
catch.
people who work very hard on the language of that.
All right.
So even if it's the naming of a post office or anything, there are people doing their job. So
I'll
I
eat
would
that.
never use the term
I'll eat that one. Okay, that's on me. I'll take that one back. Thank
But
you.
to your yes, but to your overall point, in that majority of these pieces have been by executive order, and that these are the same things that were used as critique against the immediate past president.
Right.
It's just an example of things are bad until you are in power,
Mm.
and that goes from Democrats and Republicans. Either we saw that even for Democrats in terms of changing policy in terms of how the Senate is run and changing rules, the Republicans changing rules and things of that nature. So when you're in power, all things are great, and all laws and traditional rules that exist to maintain your power are great. They're great tools to be used for great things. But when you're not in power,
Yeah, exactly.
or where things change, or someone else is in power, then they become detrimental. So we know that to be the case.
Yeah.
And in terms of the legislation he said, or the work that he said he wanted to get done in the first 100 days, that's why I continue to give it an F. He hasn't even delivered to his base what he said he was going to do during that time. And for those of us who really care, there, from my own personal perspective, there are things about this system, our system of government, that I like, that I enjoy, and there are things that I would like to radically change. But for people who, invest and believe in having a president that also works with Congress, and that we have these different branches that's supposed to work hand in hand, I say to some of the civics classes that I teach, if the founders of this country would look now and see how powerful the president, the White House has become, they would be shocked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one way that we can see the detrimental effects of that is having a Donald Trump in office.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears. There's another story that I wanted to ask you about. It's not getting a lot of coverage, all things considered, with the 100 days, North Korea, everything else that's happening in the world. But Joe Biden made some comments that really, it resonated with me in such a way that I wanted to get your feedback on it. Let's take a listen in to, this is former Vice President Joe Biden.
If you cannot say it's okay, I really mean this. We got to talk about this. And here's the deal. I've been in a lot of locker rooms. I don't know where locker rooms where it is acceptable to talk about, man, I was out this weekend and boy, I got a piece of her and I did this and I did that. The guys usually say that are usually the ugliest sons of guns in the room. The guys who do that. No, I really mean it. But here's the deal, guys. You got to speak up. You cannot let that kind of talk be bred on the college campus.
So, we didn't get the very beginning of that clip, but at the beginning of the clip, he's put it in context. He's talking about rape. He's talking about rape culture. And if someone is so drunk that they can't give consent, then it's rape. And I loved Joy. I loved the way he was so definitive about it. It was clear. It was to the point, and he spoke not only about rape, but rape culture and the things that kind of foster that environment. What was your take on those comments?
What was interesting is that, I read it and didn't see it, but in reading it, it was similar to the conversation that I had with my younger brother when he went to college. And I used to make him repeat it to me when he called to ask me for money. I would make him repeat stuff. And I said, it's like you and, another human being cannot consent to sex if you're both drunk, or if one of you are drunk. You can't do that. And so all of the things that the former vice president said are things that, we should be teaching young people. And it's not just about people who may engage in that activity. But the former vice president is correct. It's also the culture surrounding that. It's also, men and women getting together, or men getting together and, joking about someone being passed out and taking advantage of them. All of that creates the climate that is very dangerous. And that's why, connecting it to the politics of the day, why I'm so annoyed about the current conversation, at least in the Democratic Party, that's happening right now about we're too focused on social issues and not on economic issues. Because for the people that actually experience those social issues, they have very real consequences. So the social issues of talking about rape culture, if you want to define it as a social issue,
and
economic consequence for the women may be victims of that.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second, but if I heard you, that last part, you're saying defining rape culture as a social issue, it in itself has a negative effect, and even an economic negative effect on the women that go through it. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. So whether you're talking about the social issues of rape culture, whether you're talking about the social issues of those in the LGBTQ community being able to marry, that has very economic, very real economic and health consequences. If you're talking about the social issues of Black and Latino citizens being able to have equal protection under the law, that has very economic, health consequences, including whether or not we're still living and breathing. So those social issues for individuals who experience them, they're very real consequences that people in the majority may not see that affect us on a daily basis.
Absolutely. This is your first time being on my show. I really do appreciate you coming on. I know I've followed your work through the primaries, and I might be what some people consider a Bernie bro, but I love the fact that, what you just said, it really does drill down to the nexus that we have to exist on, right? It can't be either or. It has to be both, because the social issues have very real effects on people who go through it. I love the way you said it. It's very clear. And it also has very negative economic effects. So I really appreciate you coming on, and tell anyone who was telling you that to stay away from that Bernie bro, don't worry. I'm a good one.
Well, for me, I always say if you cannot discuss your, personal and political views among those who disagree with you, then maybe you don't believe in those views at all.
Absolutely.
And so, I'm comfortable and fine with talking with anyone about what I believe. And I think it's important, particularly in the polarized state that we're in, that people not just stay in the silos and only talk to the people that agree 100% with them, because otherwise we're not going to get to any compromise in order to govern effectively, in order to live effectively, in order to progress effectively.
Absolutely. So I want to invite you back, and we're going to pick a topic when you come back on something that we disagree on, so that we can just have at it and hash it out in the most positive way we possibly can.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. 857-600-0518. If you want to weigh in on the discussion, leave a voicemail, leave comments in the comments section. I believe we have a couple of comments here, or we may have a couple of voicemails, whatever's up next. Let's put it on the screen here. And we have a comment from Greg on Facebook. He says, as a practical matter, is the progressive movement necessarily confined to performing and working within the Democratic Party, or do you believe there are plausible avenues to establishing a new party to break the stranglehold of big moneyed interests in Congress? I love that question. Absolutely. People in the studio here are cheering because they really I appreciate that question, because, as a progressive, it is frustrating to see exactly what Glenn was outlining in terms of the Democratic Party being in bed with Wall Street, and not just the Democratic Party, right? So let's be sure. The Republican Party set the model, right? The Democratic Party over the last 30 years, and we'll be talking with Thomas Frank, he can outline it much more succinctly than I can, but has moved consistently in the same direction as the Republican Party, in many ways abandoning the working class. And so whether or not you can find your answer or your solution inside of the Democratic Party, you really should look at the local level. What is your local level party doing? Because that's where they need you the most. And that's where you have the ability to have the most impact. So, as far as third parties are concerned, concerned, I don't really want to go into that particular portion of it. But as a progressive, it may be best for us not to look at the national party as the system to deliver our goals, and to find organizations, whether it be third party or whether other organizations, grassroots movements, and use that to actually implement what we want to accomplish. All right, so our next guest is already here and ready to rock and roll. I am so happy to have him here today. Thomas Frank, author of Listen Liberal, and actually author of What's the Matter with Kansas? Thomas, thanks so much for joining me. How are you? We actually, looks like we may have lost him. Actually,
no, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
We have your audio, but we
me?
don't have your video. So I don't know if you can switch your video on, but we can hear you loudly and clearly. How are you today?
How about now? How about now?
Oh, there you go.
It's just my.
Absolutely. Listen, so I wanted to ask if you would, let's talk about Donald Trump's tax policy, right? Donald Trump's tax policy in the broader scheme of things, in the broader scheme of the economics that are happening right now, the neoliberal shift that you write about so succinctly over the last few years. What's your first take at Donald Trump's tax policy?
It's more of the same. This is Republicans always do this. This is just the good old tax cut strategy again. Look, something that I don't know why this is so difficult for a lot of the sort of major newspapers to understand. The Republicans don't really care about deficits. That's really not a concern to them. They're out to defund government, if you know what I mean. Remember Starve the Beast, right?
Yeah.
This is and cutting taxes is a twofer for them because it both rewards their most important constituents, the wealthy, and it defunds government, and they love it, in all sorts of ways, and they're never going to stop doing it. And the fact that it makes the deficit much larger, that doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
I mean, it matters a little bit, I imagine, but not very much.
Well, so the tax breaks, it is a standard play. I had a chance to speak with Professor Adolph Reed of University of Pennsylvania. He said the exact same phrase. It's not a surprise.
Yeah, well, he's one of the great geniuses of our of analyzing our politics. It's funny, and had we been listening to him, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation right now.
So, but what this has done, though, Thomas, is that it has resurfaced the conversation that you would think would eventually go away, and that's the validity or invalidity of trickle-down economics, right? So the entire premise is that these tax cuts are going to stimulate the GDP, the economy, and the GDP is going to grow, and then we're going to recover anything that's going to cover the deficit.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dixon. I forgot to mention that's completely wrong. You know why I didn't even think of that? Because of course it's wrong, but they always roll this out. They always roll this out every couple of years, and I've got to the point where I don't even bother to argue with it anymore. Everyone knows that's wrong.
But you would think that, right?
It's been wrong since the days of it's been wrong since the days of Calvin Coolidge, and it's still wrong. And what more can anybody say about it? It's been proven wrong again and again and again and again and again, and there's no point even talking about it anymore.
But it's back, and I understand your frustration, but it's literally back in the news right now. Like these tax cuts are going to bring revenues into the coffers. I know for our progressive audience,
like goosing the economy. Yeah,
right. Voodoo economics, exactly.
Well, that's what they called it in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
and that's what Republicans
they called it trickle down back in the 30s. Yeah. This is endless. Anyhow, that's not going to happen. This is done strictly for the two reasons that I just mentioned. It rewards the base and it defunds the state, and that's what it's all about for these guys. It's a perfect twofer for them in the most brutal political, the most brutal possible political sense, and the rest of it. The rest of it is that's just something they make up to sell the rest of us on. Of course that's not going to happen.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Right? I mean, I get it. I've been following it, studying it for some time. It's clear to anyone who actually pays attention, not so clear for people who may not be paying attention. But the second part of that you mentioned, which I think is key, is that it's really going to attack the state and what Professor Reed actually talks about quite a bit, which is the public good. It's really going to gut the public good. What I want to ask from you is, in the context of your work, right, you focused on this shift towards the right of the Democratic Party, and how the Democratic Party is somewhat complicit in a lot of these economic policies that have been forwarded that are detrimental to the working class. What do you think is, an easy question here first, but then I want you to dig into it. What do you think about the Democratic response, if any, to this economic policy, when a lot of their donors will benefit from this tax break?
Well, they oppose it, but it's always half-hearted with these guys. Look, the Democratic Party doesn't really, they don't really know what they believe in anymore. Of course they're against it, for a lot of reasons, both good and bad. But they're not adamant about it. It's not a critical thing for them. It's not really, really important. By the way, I want to throw one more thing in here, which is Trump. We've always been saying, like, who is Trump's model? We've seen he steals phrases from Franklin Roosevelt. He stole his campaign strategy from apparently George Wallace or Pat Buchanan. But the president that he really seems to be modeling himself after is, of course, Ronald Reagan. Who is, everything with Trump goes back to the 80s. Because of course that was his heyday. That's his great period.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my heyday too. By the way, you don't know that, but it was, and I was awesome in the '80s. Anyhow, me and Donald Trump. But one of the things that Reagan did was, as he cut taxes, he also increased. This is interesting. Increased spending. Mm-hmm. Okay, particularly on the military, and it ran the deficit up like massively. But it also goosed the economy. Now that works. When you increase public spending, massive sort of Keynesian stimulus spending, that works. And I think Trump is aware of this. Now, Reagan famously did all his Keynesian stimuluses with the military, all of that gigantic military buildup in the 1980s. And what Trump has talked about is a national infrastructure program, which would have even more of a big effect. So the fact that he is cutting taxes and wants to do this infrastructure spending program at the same time, okay, that might work. Yep. The tax cut part of it doesn't really matter. That's going to just drive the federal government into deep into the red, into a big hole. Mm-hmm. But the spending part of it, that has the potential to work, and I hate to say this, to get Trump reelected.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, if he think about it this way. One of the things that I encountered, and I'm going to go a little bit out of the way here. Do you remember in Listen Liberal, one of the questions that I asked when I was writing that book is, why do people love Bill Clinton? Why do Democrats, why do liberals love Bill Clinton? Mm. Because everything, most of the actual policies he proposed, and you and I have talked about this before, most of the actual things he did legislatively as president were terrible. Okay, what do they like about him? And the answer, you think about it, and the answer leaps out at you. It's because the economy did really well in the late 90s, and real wages actually grew for the only time. I was born in the mid 60s. That's the only time since the 70s, in most people's lifetimes, that real wages grew was when Bill Clinton was president in the late 90s. And Trump we're real close to full employment right now in America. If he were to do something like that and just dump a ton of Keynesian stimulus on the economy right now, wages would grow. Yeah, this guy would. Let's hope he's not listening to this show. Wages would grow, and he would succeed.
So here's the interesting thing. I want to tie this in.
The tax cuts won't do it. The tax cuts won't do it, but the Keynesian stimulus will.
Yeah, that's the part that I wanted to bring up here, and I want to tie it into this question that we have from the Facebook audience that's watching. From Steve on Facebook. He said, for you, Thomas, if Republican policies are so openly hostile to the interests of regular people, why do people continue to vote for them? And I want to add a little flair here, right? Because
there's the $1 billion question.
You've written,
it is, man.
You wrote an entire book on it, But here's the thing I want to add to it.
I've written 4 books on it. I write about this all the time.
Yeah.
This is okay. So Benjamin Dixon. Yeah. For me, this is the great question of our time. So, like I said, I was born in the mid 1960s, the heyday of the New Deal economy. The economy was growing by leaps and bounds. Government was spending like crazy. It was the golden age. Okay, this country and the rest of the Western world took this turn to the right. Beginning in the 70s, the late 70s, the early 80s, a little earlier in some places like England, a little later in other places like France. But we all did it. Mm-hmm. And it's been manifestly bad for most people. Okay? It's been, the economy of the 60s, that's gone. And what we have now is a boom time for people at the top and stagnation for everybody else, and decay and, crumbling cities and all that stuff. And, in small towns and rural areas, the opiates, the whole story.
Right.
This is a democracy. We had to vote for that. We had to approve that change. And this is the question that has puzzled me my entire adult life. Why did we choose to go down that path? And why do we continue down that path, even when it's now so manifestly clear what a disaster it's been for most people? And I have tried to answer that question in book after book after book after book. Yeah. And, we're all working on that. I hope to some degree,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Thomas,
and look at it now. The only alternative appears to be, here's Trump in this last election. By the way, the last election was fascinating, much more interesting than Trump as president. Trump as president is just another wrecking crew. This is another, George W. Bush, get out the sledgehammer and start whacking, But when he was running last year, that was really interesting because he was presenting what seemed to be an alternative to neoliberalism, an alternative to this great right turn that we've been on. But it's an alternative that's like, let's go even farther to the right. But the same with Marine Le Pen. Right. Exactly. Seriously, the same with Marine Le Pen in France. It's like she is presenting herself as an alternative to this. And, it's funny, all my life, Benjamin, I have assumed that when people got sick of this great right turn that we've been going on since Thatcher, since Reagan, even since Carter, if you want to go back that far, but this great right turn that we've been on, that when it comes to an end, it will be people like you and me that finally get to sit at the levers of power. Yeah. It'll be the left that gets back in, but what it looks like now is that the only alternative, or I'm sorry, it's not the only alternative. The people who are much more effective at presenting themselves as an alternative is people like Trump. It drives me crazy.
Right.
Right.
Well, I almost want to call you Professor Frank because I've read so many of your books.
No. I'm not a professor. No.
But Thomas Frank, author of Listen Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. I want to get you back on so we can talk even more next time. We're at the top of the hour, so thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, listen, I'll talk anytime you want, man. I'm at your service.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Listen, to the audience, we want to thank you for joining us for this noon edition of the Intercept Live. Special thanks to the entire team at the Intercept, allowing me to take over their channel once again. Hopefully, we'll be back again to take over as many times as they would like to have us. Check us out at thebenjamindixonshow.com. We will be back with a lot. You know what? I have to stop myself. My producer reminded me. Thank you. We had a full 40-minute interview with Professor Adolph Reed. And, I have to own this one. I lost it. It's gone. And it's something that Professor Reed, my apologies. I wanted to apologize to you on air because we spent so much time talking together and everyone was excited about it. But you said that I could have you back anytime. So Professor Adolph Reed, University of Pennsylvania, I want to invite you back and we'll do it live. This time I won't be able to mess it up. So thank you to the audience. Thanks to everyone who pitched in, the whole team here at the studio and everyone at the Intercept. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next time.